And people will come to you when something is wrong. And like you have similar thought experiments that I use in different situations. Like, would I have said this to this person if they were a man? Or would I have said this to this person if they were white? You know? And just
Oh,
by asking yourself these questions, if the answer is no, then probably you said something which was offensive or, whatever. If you wouldn't say it, if you ask that question in your mind, then there's something wrong with it.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Joris Merks-Benjaminsen. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
So, Joris, what do you do for fun?
For fun, that's a
Yeah,
good question. So to be honest, like some of my work is for fun.
yeah.
Like I write books about whatever fascinates me in a particular moment in my journey, and that happens to be leadership in the last many years, but it used to be many other topics before. Other than that, I just enjoy going out in nature, doing some walking, mountain biking, that type of stuff with my family.
That's perfect. I like those kind of quiet pursuits where you've got time for reflection and actually to really get into things. That sounds brilliant. Do you like to tell us a bit more about you?
Yes, so I'm based in the Netherlands, where I live in a town called Amersfoort with my wife and two kids, 6 and 10, Odin and Diana. And I've had a career of about 22 years or so in employment, um, with like roughly three stages. So I used to work in the first 6, 7, 8 years or so, first in media and advertising, and that gradually morphed into becoming a research-based consultant on brands, media, and advertising effectiveness. And that eventually brought me to Google as their head of market insights. I've spent about 12 years at Google, about half of my career. And from that role, head of market insights, I started presenting more on conferences about shifting consumer behavior, consumers moving to online shopping, and what that means for marketing organizations. And those presentations gradually got less and less data, more and more opinion and vision about how do you change an organization from traditional marketing to digital first marketing. And so my role also morphed into something else, which became more like an evangelist on digital transformation, which is when I started running trainings, workshops with large marketing organizations. And I started focusing on organizational change.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up discovering that most of the problems that people bump into when it comes to organizational change, it's not strategy. On strategy, people say lots of small things. They come out with smart actions. And then many years later, they still haven't done it. And they know they haven't done it. And the underlying reason is internal people dynamics. And in digital marketing transformation, the problem was that the online marketing departments, which were upcoming, were internally competing with the traditional marketing departments to the point that it would undermine the customer experience and it would undermine their investments in the transformation of the organization as a whole. And that triggered my first book, that insight, and I called it like schizophrenic marketing, essentially saying like, hey, this is ridiculous. You have the same customer, you work for the same company, and your internal battle is undermining the future of that company. It's undermining the customer experience. And from that moment onwards, I started focusing more on the people side of organizational change. Um, Eventually, primarily focusing on formal managers and leaders, because I discovered that those are the ones who create the space where it's easier and more rewarding for anybody else to do the right thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can totally understand because one of the things that I see a lot as well is that whole how do you take a strategy and how do you execute it? Where quite often exec teams can really focus on having a great strategy document without seeing what happens when you actually execute that and what it actually achieves what you want it to achieve,
Exactly.
which isn't very useful. But it
But
does
then
provide
it
a lot
just
of
becomes
comfort
nice,
though.
just becomes nice words on the slide.
Okay. So how do we ensure that there is leadership consistency across all the organisation, not just having great leadership in one section of the organisation.
So that inconsistently, it doesn't just apply to strategy, it also applies to organizational effectiveness and culture. So you have loads of large companies who have written down carefully in detail what their culture is like, at least what they say it's like, and what they stand for as an organization. But the reality is, when you go a few layers down in the organization, you talk to a few people, you discover within half an hour that most of that isn't true. And so you need that consistency of leadership across all layers, not just for getting from strategy to execution, but also for building an effective organization with a great culture. And in order to speak about how you create it, consistency of leadership, is probably first useful to speak about how it fades away. And so I use in my trainings a matrix, which has two axes. On the vertical axis, there's emphasis on performance, high and low. And horizontal, there's emphasis on humanness, also high and low. And it illustrates how organizations tend to drift. They can drift in two ways. So when a startup is successful in the early stages, very often the culture of the organization naturally evolves around whoever is the founder of that startup.
Yeah.
And if that is a person who is very clear in their mind about why they founded that company in the first place, what kind of impact they want to have, what they do and what they don't do, and they have their heart clearly in the right place, then you get an effective organization with a great culture, more or less automatically. And then at some point, the first management team comes in, first layer of managers comes in, and then it starts drifting. And it can drift in two ways. So you have some organizations where there's loads of structure and accountability, quite harsh performance system typically. If that's the case, very often it drifts to the place where there's low humaneness, high structure, clarity, performance. And that is what I call survival of the toughest. So it's an environment where people with slightly sharper elbows, thicker skin survive more, who are very good at managing upwards at the cost of managing downwards, good at taking care of themselves, but not so good at taking care of others. And that's a type of environment where not all types of people can survive easily. There's more internal competition, more political, etc. And the other way you can drift is the with lack of structure and clarity and accountability, which has to call survival of the nicest. So you have lots of kind people who are good at taking care of each other. You have managers and leaders who take care of their teams, but then because of the lack of accountability, you can get away with not delivering. And if you do that for too long, then people who depend on your work, they don't get what you were promised to deliver, and they become frustrated. Finger pointing starts. And if that continues, the organization becomes like walking through the mud, and in the end also political, but just in a different way. And in both cases, the people who want to do the right thing, they're the ones to leave first. So it gets worse the longer it takes. So that's how it drifts. And so how you then retain it as you scale or restore some of it when you're already large and you lost some of it is essentially by creating consistent management and leadership in all layers with that balance of human and performance pressure. And it depends a bit on what direction you've drifted away from it. So there's some organizations that need to dial up human, but they're not at the cost of accountability. And the other ones need to dial up structure and accountability, but not at the cost of human. And doing that in a consistent way is much harder than it sounds.
Yeah, I love the idea of survival of the toughest and the survival of the nicest. Because that's so common. I was thinking about what you're saying, and I was thinking that, I think of it as like culture creep, where you establish a culture and then you don't pay attention to it. And then it starts to move towards wherever the most dominant voice is. So whether that dominant voice is a tough voice or a kind voice or an in-between voice, it'll just go. And I don't think there's a problem with micro cultures in organizations as long as those micro cultures are value add, the culture add. So they're aligned to the main culture. Um, and I think that can work really well. So an example would be if you had, I don't know, say 5 values, and everybody within the organization should be demonstrating these values, but different departments will demonstrate those values in different ways based on the work that's required and the dynamics and the rest of it. But it still feels the same, even though each department might dial up. Maybe the accounts department will be uh, leaning more heavier in the financial type of values, but they'll still have the basic humanity values. But when you go in there, you might see much more of a demonstration on accountability, for example, or something like that. Do you agree that micro cultures can work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that it needs to be consistent
Yeah.
mean that it needs to be exactly the same everywhere. And I think you're right in how you describe the creep that happens.
Mm,
I almost every leader I speak to, they say, I care about my people. I care about the mission of the company. I
mm,
care about doing well for the earth with our company. You know, and but the reality, and I believe they genuinely mean it. It's not just words, but the reality is their behavior is not consistently aligned to those words, not out of malicious intent, but primarily out of unconscious leadership having to execute in an always on pressure environment. So everyone who is a leader, no matter where you are in the organization, is always under pressures that are way more than you can handle. So all choices are being made under pressure. And the dynamics that you have in a large organization make it very easy for certain choices to just be deprioritized over and over and over again. And then it starts drifting if you are not sufficiently conscious. And it's typically stuff which is long-term impact at the cost of short-term impact. It's typically holistic things that you want to do for the organization that suffer because people focus too much on their KPIs and what they need to do in their silos. So that's where the drifting starts. And what you need to create as an organization is you need to fill that gap between saying and doing. And the only way you can create that is by working on 3 layers. One is the role model that the most senior leaders are towards the people below them. And the only way they can be that role model if they genuinely apply all the things they say about leadership or about the mission and culture of the company directly with their own teams. So you have their role directly with their teams, their role as a role model. And then there's the supporting structures and processes that need to make it easy and rewarding for everybody to follow. And what you see very often in an organization is that, for instance, a leader might say, we need to win in the long term. But then your KPIs are typically everything that's easy to measure. And short-term impact is always easier to measure than long-term impact. So whenever there's a business review or there are performance review cycles, you end up being evaluated on short-term KPIs. And everybody knows that. Everybody knows, yes, we say long-term is important, but in the end, you get rewarded slightly more for short-term impact. And that creates a space where people start drifting from what leaders say if you're not sufficiently conscious.
yeah, I thank you for that. I would agree that part of the problem are individual leaders, but the bigger problem is the organization, as you said, because they can present an inconsistency by saying these are our values and then actively um, support other things. So it's so very well to say collaboration is a part of our value set. and then you have a bonus structure that acts against collaboration. So
Yeah.
it's all about it's all about the competition. I mean, I remember many years ago, I worked in an organisation, and it was a national, it was a big national retailer, and you had the values, things like collaboration and whatnot. But on store level, you were actively competing against local stores in the same company. So not only were you competing against your competitors, but you were also competing against, other stores. So you would do things that would probably compromise the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So, do a store-wide discount on something so that you make more money than the shop, literally, a few hundred meters down the road. But it doesn't help the larger organization. So, yeah, that's something that we really have to watch what we do, and we look at it from, a large organizational point. Because I think my view is that leadership is personal. It's personal to the people that you're leading, and it's personal in the sense of what I do, what you do is personal to you, if that makes sense. And I think that with that as a mindset, we need to personalize our leadership. So we need to have the skills to be consistently applying the same rules, but personalize it for the individuals. And it's a tricky thing because you don't want to be discriminating or favoriting, but you can't treat every individual the same.
The hard thing about that, and every thing that you need from leaders, is that there's always opposing forces.
Yeah.
This particular case is, on the one hand, you want consistent style and quality of leadership, but it also needs to be personal to the team member and personal to who you are. There's no
Yeah.
point trying to be different than you are yourself. And then you have, for instance, the need for empathy, but also the need for accountability. You have the need for psychological safety, but you also must deal with low performers. And you need to be able to make interventions in your organization that might cost some people their jobs from time to time. And so, and all of that under pressure. So that's, and so if you speak about leadership and you say we need more of one thing, then you're not really helpful, because the reality is you need always several things in a certain balance, and you need to apply that consistently under pressure. So I always try to approach any leadership question from a holistic perspective, so that you can see the dials on every side. And so if you take that from the making leadership personal, I use, on the one hand, management feedback, upward feedback from teams towards their managers, so that managers can learn from their teams what they need from them, what they value about what they do, and they can do so with a certain frequency. So at Google, every manager gets evaluated by their team every 6 months on the 10 behaviors of great managers. And those 10 behaviors are quantitative statements on a 5-point rating scale, and they have certain tensions in them. So, for instance, you would find in there, is a good decision maker, but also provides autonomy, doesn't micromanage. That's very hard to reconcile, because the moments when you need to be a strong decision maker is typically when a decision needs to be made that makes some people happy and some people unhappy. And if you do that on the wrong moment, people experience micromanagement. And
Can I just jump in there? Because
yes,
what
yeah,
I've heard, not necessarily not Google Pacific, but just generally speaking, and what I've seen for myself is that unless there is a neutral objective oversight, what can happen is the leaders don't make the right decisions for the business because they're worried about personal reviews. So they don't decide to tackle the low performance because you might get poor performance review. I mean, I remember many years ago when I was younger, having a bit of a shock actually, having a big culture shock, walking into an organisation where they had the system where the staff would rate the managers, and it would end up, if you got a bad rating, you could get disciplined and whatnot. And what happened was some managers were just, I guess, bullied. So that you'd have people who would actually orchestrate really poor reviews against a leader who was objectively doing very well and doing the right thing, but they just wanted them out, or so they would like club together and actually give some very poor, unjustified reviews. And when I walked into that organisation, I was surprised that this had come to the point that it was so common that some of the leaders would just, just do whatever the loudest people wanted them to do. And the organisation itself did not help matters, because they would put everybody's responses to all the managers up around all the walls. So there was also a shaming element as well. So it
Yeah.
was, I mean, obviously I put a stop to all of that when I arrived, but it was shocking that for years that was deemed normal. And it explained that when you want to speak to a leader and you said you need to do this, they would be, I don't want to do it, because they're worried about their reviews, because they could lose their jobs if this cabal decided.
It depends a bit on the type of organization you have, right?
Yes, of course. You need a mature organisation, right? That
So
understands.
if you have these highly commercial competitive organizations where the tendency is to manage upwards at the cost of downwards,
Yep.
those are very often the organizations where they fear if you introduce manager feedback, upward feedback, and you hold manager accountable, that the managers start becoming just friends with their teams and then shy away from dealing with low performers. Reality is, in those types of organizations, that will never happen. So first of all, I've actually had colleagues at Google. You get the evaluation, and the evaluation counts for the performance evaluation of the manager. So it actually can influence reward, promotion, etc. So there's quite a bit of power to give to a team. But the reality is, I've seen some managers try to essentially beat the system by pretending to be friends with their teams. But then, because there are these tensions between the statements, at some point, if you're too friendly with your team, then they're going to have unrealistic expectations. And then there will be a moment when you're going to have to give them a performance rating which isn't in line with their expectation. And then they become disappointment and it backfires and you get a low rating. So there is no way you consistently cheat yourself into high scores by being friends with your team.
I see what you're saying. Yes, that's not what I was intimating. I think where I've seen or heard people talk about it, the leaders aren't trying to manipulate higher scores. They're trying to make sure they stay in a job by being, like you said, the survival of the nicest, because it's more not about the money, but it's more about how long will they stay there. But I think these kind of things can work, but you just, as I say, it depends on the culture and the maturity of the organization.
The reality at Google and also in many highly commercial organizations is, as long as you hit your KPIs, if you get low manager scores, your bosses don't care. And if that's the case, that's one of these territories where every leader knows, well, we say people are important, but we know actually it's not. So you get then a type of leader who starts hitting KPIs by burning out teams if they have to, so that they look better in front of their leaders and build their career, right? So
Yes.
in those types of organizations, the risk is higher that the upward feedback doesn't get enough weight to genuinely matter. And I think the scenario that you describe is one in an organization where the human care is already high.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add that upward feedback back on top, and then it just gets a weight that is too much, so that people can hijack their managers if they want to, So it's very much on that how you want to rebalance. If you're highly commercial, high accountability, low human, then it will help you rebalance. But if you're already high on human, then it might actually you might end up overdoing it.
Yep, I like that. Let's listen to a quick advert. As a leader, you know that having a strong level of influence is essential to achieving your goals. But how do you know if you're truly making an impact? Take the How Influential Are You scorecard to get a clear picture of your current level of influence and identify areas for improvement. With personalised recommendations and valuable strategies, you'll be able to amplify your influence and make a real difference as a leader. Don't miss this opportunity to improve your leadership skills. Take the scorecard now at amplifyyourinfluence.scoreapp.com. Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious. I think also when we're talking about leadership being personal, an example there could be, for example, accountability. So as an organisation, you want to ensure that everybody's accountable and everybody has autonomy. So that's where you're going, and that's how you're leading from that perspective. However, then you need to layer in the individual. So, for example, you might have an individual who may be autistic, for example. So you may, in that stuff, need to help them more to gain the autonomy, because they might need much more literal explanation, much more hand holding until they can get to the point of where they can be let loose to do that. And it could be the same with accountability. You might have somebody who has ADHD who's very impulsive, or someone who's bipolar. And again, it's not like you're throwing out the value systems, but you have to make amendments to be able to get the best out of those individuals. So that's what I was saying, is that whilst you have a consistency around the values and the culture that you want to engender, you have to then look at the individual person in front of you and go, right, for you to be able to fulfill this, I need to help you do this, this, and this.
Yeah. What it requires from team leaders is that they spend enough time with the people that report into them to understand how they tick.
Yes.
But if you put that in the context where they're continuously under pressure from all sides, way too many demands, maybe even an organization where managing upwards pays off more than managing downwards.
Yeah.
They always feel they don't have the amount of time that is needed to work shoulder to shoulder with their team, maybe go for a walk with their team members with a certain frequency, to deeply know them as a person, as professional, and to give them the support they need. So they always feel they don't have time for that. And so that gets deprioritized over and over again without being conscious about it. And the other problem is that their team doesn't tell them, because people are reluctant to give their seniors critical feedback. Day one, you become a manager of a team. There's certain things you're just no longer going to tell you. And this system of feedback from teams to managers is an opportunity to reset that. So when you get manager feedback results from your team and you openly share it with them, you have a dialogue about it, ask curious questions, make sure negative feedback doesn't backfire, change your behavior, and you do that over and over again every 6 months or so, then they're going to feel more safe to tell you what they need from you, because they don't fear it backfires. They see that you change your behavior. And that kind of resets that information flow from your team towards you, so that you realize, okay, if I show up late every 5 minutes for every meeting I have with the team member, it is a signal every single week to them that they don't care to me, that they don't matter to me, right? That's something that people don't tell you, but it is true. If you come 5 minutes late every single week, every week you say to them, you matter less to me than anyone else. And so you get these signals from them. Okay, this is what I need from you. This is when I need support from you. This is when you need to leave me alone and need to leave me and let me do my thing. And that's when you start to see how you can adapt your leadership style to what different types of people need from you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the organisation can support by having formal processes. But I also believe that as leaders, we can provide psychological safety. We can provide a culture, an environment where this kind of information is freely given, because you're freely respecting it. I've certainly helped organisations do that, and I've certainly, done that myself. And I think the part of the problem that we have is that we want organisations to formalise everything, when as good leaders, our job is to get the best performance and be there for the team and all this kind of other stuff. which requires us to do things ourselves. Joris, before we end, tell me a little bit about your views on managing without power.
So I use the title Managing Without Power as an anchor for everything I do. So it's the title of my book, but also an anchor for my trainings.
Yep.
And it's meant to express how would you manage or lead if you would not have the power that is inevitably connected to your role as a former manager and leader.
Okay.
And it's because that power position has all kinds of unintended by consequences. So one of those is that people don't say certain things to you anymore. But the other thing is that when you do say something to your team, it carries much more weight than you think. So critical question from the CEO a few layers down could be like a bomb exploding in
Yeah.
someone's face without them realizing it, right? And so you end up doing all kinds of stuff which has different consequences than you think, and then the people don't tell you. And so if you step in that thought experiment often enough, would I do this if I would not have the power that I have in my role, right? Would I speak as long as I do without asking questions? Would I show up late for meetings, etc.? And when you start imagining what you would have done if you would not be in that power position, then you start tuning in on people. You kind of dial up all your senses to feel what people need from you. And you start also tuning down the unintended pressures that you create from your position. And that's when you start doing essentially what you describe, when you start creating the environment where all voices are being heard because you act thoughtfully in all moments that matter, and people start feeling they can come to you with everything, even with topics that feel somewhat unsafe.
I do like that. I like the idea of using it as an aid memoir. I like the idea of saying, if I didn't have any power, could I get away with what I'm doing right now? Is it fair, the thing that I'm doing right now?
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's really a good thing, because I think sometimes people, it's not just the weight of the words it's being when you're a senior leader, but it's also the privilege that you have. You have to be careful that what you say offhand isn't taken to be read. Or if you say, can you just do this now? And it's 5 minutes to five and everybody finishes at five, they're allowed to say, no, I want to go home. As opposed to like you're expected, because sometimes senior leader, as a leader anyway, sometimes you say things without actually really thinking about it, because you assume that they would say no, or that's not possible. You expect them to be able to talk back, and if you haven't actually built a culture around that, you might be expecting them to say, actually no, it's I'm going out, or day off tomorrow, or whatever. So you just go, oh, just carry on. And one of the things I used to say to people when I was in corporate was, I will treat you like an adult, and I will give you work to do. If at any point I am giving you work and it's too much work because you've got other stuff to, I'm relying on you to tell me. And or if I say yes, you still need to do it, but you think there's a reason you shouldn't do it because there's dependencies in the other work, I expect you to tell me, because I'm like an adult, and make it clear, so that's and the first few times you have to ask the question. I've just given you this. Is there anything else that's going to be compromised if you do this? Do you have the time? So they get used to being able to have the autonomy themselves to say, or the agency themselves to say, actually, Jude, if I do this, this can't happen. So you can go, then you as a leader can weigh it up and go, that's okay if it doesn't happen. Or, oh, I didn't realize it was that important. Bench the thing I've just given you, concentrate on that. Because I think sometimes people don't realize that as senior leaders have a lot of stuff going on. So they can't always remember what everybody's working on, or what stage they are, or how important it is. So we need our employees to turn around and go, Joris, no, it's just, this is not, or this is a really bad idea. That's equally as important. Do not do this, because another thing I used to say to people is like, don't let me leave the office to speak to someone when you know that I'm going to tell them something that's wrong, or or it's a bad idea. Your job is to stop me. Don't tell the CEO that, because that's rubbish. So you want that ability for people to question you and argue with you, because that's where you get the best solution when somebody says, Joris, no. that's really rubbish. That's the worst thing you could possibly do because of X, Y, Z. And because you might not know about X, Y, Z because you're not on the coalface.
Yeah, but you have to actively cultivate that
You
behavior,
have
right?
to
There
actively,
are
yeah. It
lots
doesn't
of
happen in a
leaders
day.
who say, my door is always open, and anyone who disagrees with me can always say it. But then because of that power position that they unconsciously hold, they have all kinds of small behaviors that people take as a signal, like, no, I can't go there when I have something to say.
Or
No,
they sigh, or that person sighs if you walk through the room, like, yes, you're like, oh, okay, it's not really open to everybody then.
yeah. So if you ask yourself like several times a day, would I get away with this behavior if I would not have my power position? Then you end up demonstrating lots of small behaviors that reinforce that message. My door is always open.
Yes, I like that.
Then people will come to you when something is wrong. And like you have similar thought experiments that I use in different situations. Like, would I have said this to this person if they were a man? Or would I have said this to this person if they were white? You know? And just
Oh,
by asking yourself these questions, if the answer is no, then probably you said something which was offensive or, whatever. If you wouldn't say it, if you ask that question in your mind, then there's something wrong with it.
yeah, I think I remember when I was a senior leader at a very young age. I remember going and I was the only female. I remember going into one of the exec meetings, and somebody said, "Oh, can you just take notes?" Because I was like new into the organisation, and I immediately said, "Yeah, that's fine. Who's going to do it next time?" And there
Yeah.
was long silence, and kind of like 24. And they were, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Well, presumably we all take turns taking notes because it's no one's job to take notes, is there?" And then I was like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah." But it was because I knew that if I just said yes, that would be my job. Like I would be the secretary, which
So this is one of those small things, right? Where if you're unconscious about the impact of your leadership, you just say who wants to take notes, and then typically a female person raises their hand.
yeah,
And what I used to do when I asked that question, I would say, okay, we're going to have a note-taking rotation system, and
yeah.
I will be the first to take notes.
Oh, nice.
And so I could demonstrate nobody is above taking notes. And on top of that, I could demonstrate how I wanted them to be taken, how fast I wanted them to be circulated.
Ah, oh, good. Role modeling.
Yeah, yeah. So and that's true for like every single small thing. You have to be conscious about the impact that it is. We had a leader at Google, and he used to have a workout session on a fixed moment every week, and he discovered people were optimizing their time to be near him, so they would go to the gym at the same time, and then have more of those coffee conversations at their personal benefit. And when he realized that it had that particular impact, he started uh, randomizing his training time so that people couldn't get personal benefit out of it, and it became neutral again. So you have to be conscious about those types of details.
I like that. It's like I remember another organisation I worked with where um the director had on a Friday, like after work management meeting in the local, this is like a few years ago, so it's obviously different now, but in the local pub. Um, but it was like a standing thing. Everybody expected, and obviously I didn't know. It was like, I was like, I didn't go because I just thought everyone was going down the pub, right? And I was like, I didn't want to do that. And then it told me off the next day because for not being there. And I said, "Oh, I assumed this was some sort of like jolly because it was like after work and blah, blah, blah." And he said, "No, everyone's expected to go there." And I said, "If you want to actually have a formal meeting, then you need to set a formal meeting." I said, "I don't have a problem with some meetings being after work, but you can't just assume everybody's going to go there because people have." I mean, I didn't have children or anything, but other people had children or other things to be doing, and you can't just extend someone's work day. And not every individual would be comfortable in a place where alcohol is served either. So they had never thought about how that affected other people. It was just like he wanted to have an after work drink, and by having a work meeting meant that it was something that was okay by the company as opposed to him personally insisting people um was drinking with him.
It gives a strong signal, right? Like
Yeah.
like the way I like to look at it is that everything you do as a senior leader is under a magnifying glass. And that means in a negative scenario that everything you do or don't do unconsciously is seen by people and taken as a signal, and it shapes culture and effectiveness of the organization negatively. But when you're conscious about the fact that you are under a magnifying glass, you can make small adjustments very consciously, like rotating your training schedule, like setting that example about note taking, by consciously shaping team moments in the way that has a very deliberate positive impact on the team. And when you do that, even when they're very small things, because it's under a magnifying glass, people will notice it and they will take it as a sign that when you say my door is always open, you genuinely mean it.
Yeah, because when it's not open, then it's not open.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's the other thing, isn't it? It's like, oh, the door's closed. They're probably in a meeting or they've got quiet time or whatever, but the door's open, so I could just stroll in. Joris, this was a really good conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. Are you leading or just managing? The best leaders amplify their influence, not their workload. I'm Judith Germain, a multi-award winning leadership expert, and my Amplify Your Impact and Influence mentoring helps senior leaders cut through uncertainty, strengthen their leadership identity, and lead with confidence. No off-the-shelf solutions, just tailored strategic mentoring that works. Ready to lead with greater impact? Visit bit.ly/amplify influence impact to find out more.